The boy in the lane had the Ravensmoor eyes, and the Duke of Ravensmoor, who had come home after 5 years to bury the last of his own name in the family vault, reined in his horse so sharply that the animal reared, because he was looking into a small, dirty face turned up to his out-of-the-hedgerow shadow, and the eyes in that face were the gray of stormlight over the sea, flecked at the center with a ring of amber, and they were his own eyes, and his father's before him and his grandfather's. The eyes that hung in oils the whole length of the Ravensmoor gallery, and no child of a village lane in the whole of England had any business owning them. Sebastian Ravenscar, 7th Duke of Ravensmoor, sat his plunging horse in the September lane and stared at a boy of perhaps 4 years old, and the boy stared back, unafraid. A bunch of wilting harebells clutched in one grubby fist, and the world that Sebastian had spent 5 years freezing into a shape he could bear cracked straight across, silently, from top to bottom. "Tom," a woman's voice sharp with fear from beyond the hedge. "Tom, come away from the road." And she came round the gap in the hawthorn, half running, a slight woman in a much-mended gray dress with her sleeves pushed up from washing and her dark hair coming down, and she scooped the boy back against her skirts with both arms and turned to face the man on the horse who had frightened her, and it was Lucinda. It was Lucinda Vane. For a moment neither of them could speak. Sebastian looked down at her from the height of his horse, and she looked up at him from the dust of the lane with her son gathered against her, and 5 years fell away and stood between them at once, both, the way the years do when two people who have wrecked each other meet without warning. She was thinner than he remembered, and older, and there was a wariness graven into her face that had not been there when she was 21 and laughing. But it was Lucinda, unmistakably, the woman he had married in secret in a cold little church 5 years ago, and had spent every day since teaching himself to hate, because hating her had been the only way to survive believing what he had been told to believe. "Grace," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady and perfectly cold, and it was that coldness, not tears, not accusation, but a flat frozen courtesy as to a stranger, that told Sebastian before he understood anything else how deep the wound went. "We did not know you had returned. We will not trouble you, Tom," and she began to draw the boy away, back through the gap in the hedge, toward wherever it was she now lived in the mended gray dress, 5 miles from the great house that should have been hers. "Stop," said Sebastian. He got the word out with difficulty, his throat had closed. "Whose child is that?" She went very still. The boy, sensing the tightness in the air, pressed closer to her skirts and looked up at the strange, angry man with the Ravensmoor eyes in his own small face, and Lucinda's arm tightened round him, and for one instant Sebastian saw something flare in her fury, grief, 5 years of it, before she mastered it and put the flat courtesy back over it like a lid. "Mine," she said. "He is mine. Good day, your grace." And she took her son and went back through the hedge and was gone, and Sebastian sat alone in the lane on his trembling horse with the September light slanting gold through the hawthorn, and could not move, because a boy of 4 with his own eyes had said nothing at all to him, and had undone in 10 seconds the whole cold architecture of 5 years. He did not go on to the village. He turned his horse and rode back to Ravensmoor at a gallop that did the animal no good, and flung the reins at a startled groom, and went up through the great echoing house that smelled of dust sheets and mourning to the long gallery where the dead dukes hung, and he walked the length of it in the failing light looking into the painted faces of his fathers, and every one of them looked back at him out of the same gray stormlight eyes, flecked with amber, that had looked up at him from a boy's dirty face in a village lane. And he stood at last before the portrait of himself, painted at 21, the year he had married Lucinda Vane, and he looked into his own young eyes, and then he sat down on the cold floor of the gallery beneath his own likeness like a man whose legs had failed him, and put his head in his hands. For 5 years he had believed a thing, and the thing had let him live. He had believed that Lucinda Vane had married him for his rank and his prospects, and had thrown him over the instant those prospects seemed to fail, for he had been, that year, at bitter odds with his father, who had disinherited him in a fury over the secret marriage and sworn to leave the whole unentailed fortune elsewhere. And it was in the very worst of that estrangement, when it had seemed Sebastian might be Duke of Ravensmoor in name and a pauper in fact, that his mother had come to him, grave and gentle and full of sorrow, and told him that Lucinda had been to see her. That Lucinda, learning he was to be disinherited, had asked what provision the family would make if she were to withdraw quietly and let the marriage be annulled, that she had named a sum, that she had taken it, and that she had gone, with the money, saying, his mother had wept telling him saying that she had been a fool to tie herself to a man who was to have nothing, and that she washed her hands of him. He had not wanted to believe it, but his mother had shown him things, a note in what looked like Lucinda's hand, a receipt, the empty lodging where Lucinda had lived. The landlady who confirmed the young woman had gone away suddenly with a gentleman's carriage and never come back. And Lucinda herself had vanished utterly, answering none of the frantic messages he sent in those first weeks, and a proud man, wounded to the bone, betrayed, as he thought, by the one person he had trusted, does not go on sending messages into a silence forever. He had stopped. He had let his pride close over the wound like ice over a black pool, and he had gone abroad, to the continent, to the long wars, seeking in the noise and danger of them some drowning of the thing inside him. And he had stayed away 5 years, and had come home only now because his father had died at last. The old quarrel never healed, and the disinheritance never carried out after all, the old duke having died intestate as to the great fortune, so that it came to Sebastian whole, which was its own bitter joke. And Sebastian had come home a duke and a rich man and an entirely hollow one, to bury his father and take up his cold inheritance and live out his life alone, having taught himself that Lucinda Vane was a mercenary who had used him and discarded him, and that he was well rid of her, and that the ache which had never once in 5 years entirely left him was merely a habit of the body that time would eventually cure. And now there was a boy of 4 in a village lane with the Ravensmoor eyes. Sebastian sat on the floor of the gallery a long time in the dark and did the arithmetic he did not want to do. 5 years since the parting, a boy of about 4, if the boy were his, then Lucinda had not vanished with a gentleman's carriage and a purse of the family's money to wash her hands of a disinherited husband. Lucinda had vanished carrying his child. Lucinda had borne his son alone, in poverty, in a mended gray dress. And everything he had believed for 5 years, everything that had let him survive, was a lie. And he had been not the betrayed but the betrayer, the man who had let his pride close over the wound and gone abroad to the wars, while the woman he had married bore his son and wrote. He stopped, something cold went down his spine in the dark. She had written. In those first months, before he had hardened, before he had gone abroad, he had a memory faint, long buried under the ice of his mother, telling him that Lucinda had sent no word, that the silence was itself the proof of her guilt, that a woman with anything to say for herself would surely have written. And he had accepted it because it fit the story, because a guilty woman would keep silent. But sitting on the floor of the gallery with his son's eyes burning in his mind, Sebastian Ravensmoor found that he no longer believed his mother's story about anything at all. And a new and terrible question rose up in him out of the dark, the question that was to drive everything that followed. What if she had written? What if Lucinda Vane had written to him, again and again, across those 5 years, and the letters had never reached him? What if there had been letters, and someone in this house had made sure he never saw them? He rose from the floor in the blackness of the gallery, under the painted eyes of all his fathers, and he understood that he could not rest, could not eat, could not sleep, could not draw a clean breath until he knew the truth of 2 things, whether that boy was his son, and whether, for 5 years, the woman he had taught himself to hate had been calling out to him through a silence that someone else had built. And he went to find a candle, and then to find his mother, who was even now in the house, arrived that afternoon for the funeral, sitting in her black in the room that had always been hers. And he found that his hands were shaking, and that he was more afraid of the answers than he had ever been of anything in 5 years of war. He found a candle in the gallery cupboard where they had always been kept, and lit it with hands that would not quite hold steady, and went down through the great dark house toward the wing that had been his mother's for 40 years. And the house he passed through was a house of the dead in more ways than one. His father lay in state in the great hall below, the coffin on its trestles under a black pall, 6 tall candles burning at the corners and an old servant nodding in a chair to keep the watch. And Sebastian stopped at the head of the stair and looked down at the black shape of the coffin in the pool of candlelight, and felt nothing he could name not grief, for there had been little between them to grieve, not anger, quite. Only a vast weary sorrow for a whole family that had spent its strength on pride and coldness and the guarding of a name, and had guarded it, in the end, into a wasteland. For that was what Ravensmoor was, he saw, walking through it that night with his single candle, a wasteland. A great house, 10,000 acres, a name 8 centuries old, room after cold room of accumulated splendor and not one warm thing in the whole of it, not one voice raised in ordinary laughter, not one hearth where a family had ever simply sat and been glad of one another. His father had ruled it like a frost. His mother had governed it like a general. And Sebastian, walking its dark galleries at 3 in the morning with the eyes of a village boy burning in his mind, understood that he had spent one golden summer, 5 years ago, in the warmth of a girl sketching by a river, and that it had been the only warmth he had ever known, and that he had let it be taken from him, and had come home now to this, to the frost and the coffin and the cold accumulated centuries, and had almost resigned himself to living out his life in it, until a boy in a lane had shown him what he had thrown away. An old woman was on the back stairs as he passed, in a nightgown and shawl, a candle of her own in her hand, Nanny Preing, who had been his nurse when he was small and had stayed on into her great age as such old servants do, half forgotten, kept out of kindness in a corner of the vast household. She peered up at him and knew him at once, though he had been 5 years gone. "Master Sebastian," she said. She had never once in her life called him anything else, not my lord, not your grace, and he had always loved her for it. The one person at Ravensmoor who had held him as a child and rocked him and been, in her rough way, the nearest thing to a mother's warmth the cold house had afforded. "You're abroad late and white as the sheet. Whatever's the matter, my lamb?" And Sebastian, who had told no one anything, found the whole of it rising in his throat and could not stop it. "Preing," he said, "there is a boy in the village, at Nettleworth, a boy of 4 years with our eyes, Lucinda's boy, Lucinda Vane, that I married, that he could not go on." The old woman's face did the strangest thing. It did not fill with surprise. It filled instead with a slow, terrible relief, as of a burden long carried and set down at last, and her old eyes swam. "So you've seen him," she whispered. "So you've seen the boy. Oh, thank God, thank God. I've prayed 5 year you come home and see him, and I durstn't tell you, I durstn't write, for they'd have turned me out into the road and who'd have believed an old nurse against her grace. But I've seen him, Master Sebastian. I've seen the boy in the churchyard of a Sunday when I could get down to the village, and I've grieved for him and for the poor mother, and I've held my tongue 5 year and it's near killed me." She caught at his sleeve with her old hand. "It was your lady wrote to you, time and again. I saw the letters come. I saw her grace take them. I never saw what became of them, but I saw them come and I saw them taken, and I knew there was a wickedness being done in this house, and I was too old and too feared to stop it, and I've that on my soul, and I'll answer for it. But you've seen the boy now. You'll set it right. Say you'll set it right, my lamb. Say it, and let an old woman sleep easy for the first night in 5 year." Sebastian took the old nurse's trembling hands in both of his in the cold of the back stair, and he said, "I will set it right, Preing. I swear it to you. Whatever it costs and however long it takes, I will set every part of it right. You have carried this 5 years. You may set it down now. It is mine to carry from here." And he kissed her old forehead, which he had not done since he was a boy, and left her weeping quiet, grateful tears on the stair, and went on toward his mother's rooms with the last of his doubt burned away, for here was a second witness, unprompted, unpaid, an old woman with nothing to gain, telling him that the letters had come and had been taken. And by the time he reached the dowager's door his hand no longer shook at all, and he did not knock, but opened it, and went in to have the truth of it from the one person in the house who had built the whole long lie. The Dowager Duchess of Ravensmoor sat very upright in a high-backed chair by a small fire in a black gown of stiff silk, her white hair dressed as immaculately as though she expected a levee rather than a funeral, and she looked up at her son when he came in without candle or knock and said, "Sebastian, you are pale. This day has been a strain on us all. Sit down. You will make yourself ill striding about the house at such an hour." "I have seen a child," Sebastian said. He did not sit. "In the lane below Nettleworth this afternoon, a boy of 4 years in the care of a woman in a grey dress. The woman was Lucinda Vane. The child had my eyes, madam, our eyes, the Ravensmoor eyes. There is no mistaking them, and you know there is not." He watched her face as a duelist watches a blade. "Whose child is that?" He had thought she might flinch. She did not. Augusta, Dowager Duchess of Ravensmoor, had governed her face for 60 years as she governed everything else, and it did not betray her now. But Sebastian had spent 5 years among men who lied to survive, and he had learned to read the small country beneath the face, and he saw, in the infinitesimal stillness that came over her, that she was not surprised, that she had known all along, that the news which had shattered him was to her merely the arrival of a danger long foreseen. "The vain creature has a bastard, it seems," said his mother smoothly. "I am sorry you should have had it flung in your face on such a day. These women are shameless. No doubt she has told the child some tale and dressed it up in eyes that a fond mother sees a resemblance in where none exists. Gray eyes are common enough, Sebastian. You are overwrought and you are seeing ghosts. Put it from your mind. That woman took a great deal of this family's money 5 years ago to remove herself from your life. And if she has since disgraced herself with some other man and got a child, it is nothing to us, and I will not have her brought up in this house on the day we bury your father." "She took money," Sebastian repeated slowly. "You know she did. I told you so myself at the time. I was the one who had the sorrow of telling you." "You told me a great many things at the time, madam. I was young and disinherited and half mad with it, and I believed everything you told me because you were my mother and I could not conceive that you would lie to me about the one thing in the world that mattered." He came a step closer to the fire, and the small flames lit the hard planes of his face. "I have believed it for 5 years. It let me live. And this afternoon a boy of 4 looked up at me out of a hedge with my own eyes, and I find I believe nothing you have ever told me about Lucinda Vane, and I am going to learn the truth of every part of it, madam, if I have to take this house apart stone by stone. So I will ask you plainly once, and I will know if you lie. Did Lucinda Vane come to you, 5 years ago, and ask for money to annul our marriage and go away?" The dowager met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "Did she take it?" "Yes." "And did she in the years since write to me, ever once?" And there, at last Sebastian saw it. The flicker, the half-second hesitation, the tiny recalibration of a woman deciding how much of a lie she could still sustain. And it was answer enough, it was more than enough, and something in his chest went cold and quiet and deadly. "How should I know whether she wrote to you?" his mother said. "Your correspondence was your own affair." "My correspondence came to this house while I was abroad, madam. It was held here and forwarded or not forwarded at your direction, for I gave the order myself before I left that you should have the managing of my affairs. Anything sent to me at Ravensmoor these 5 years passed through your hands first." He watched her. "Did letters come for me from Lucinda Vane?" "I do not recall." "You recall everything. You have never in your life forgotten a single thing that touched this family's interests. Did letters come?" "Sebastian." "Did letters come, madam?" "If they did," said the Dowager Duchess, and now at last her composure showed its first fine crack, and beneath the crack was not shame but a cold, hard certainty of her own rightness that was, Sebastian thought, far worse than shame. "If they did, then I did what any mother in my position would have done, and I make no apology for it, and I would do it again tomorrow. I did not raise you and guard you and marry your father, and hold this family together through 40 years to see you throw yourself and your name and your inheritance away on a physician's penniless daughter you had bewitched yourself over at 21. She was beneath you. The marriage was a disaster secret, hasty, ruinous, contracted behind your father's back, and it near cost you everything, for it drove him to disinherit you. I saved you, Sebastian. I ended it. Yes, I told you she took money, though she did not take a farthing, the little fool, she would not. I offered it and she flung it in my face, and I hated her the more for it. I told you she was mercenary because it was the only thing that would make you let go. You would have chased her to the ends of the earth else, and ruined yourself past mending. And when she wrote, yes, she wrote a dozen times more, pleading, and then the dowager stopped. And then, said Sebastian very quietly, she wrote to tell me she was carrying my child. Did she not, madam? The Dowager Duchess of Ravensmoor was silent. Where are the letters? Sebastian said. When she did not answer, he said it again, and his voice, which he had kept level through the whole of it by a monstrous effort, broke at last on the third asking. Where are they? Did you burn them? Or are they somewhere in this house? 5 years of a woman crying out to me while I told myself she had never sent a word. I have a right to know, madam. I have a son. I have a son of 4 years old whom I have never held, who has grown up in a mended gray dress 5 miles from his own inheritance, because you decided that a physician's daughter was beneath the Ravensmoor eyes he wears, madam, in his own face, the same as yours and mine. Where are the letters? The dowager rose. She was trembling now, but it was still not with shame. It was with the fury of a proud will meeting, for the first time in decades, a will as hard as its own. I did it for you, she said. Everything I have ever done I did for you and for this family. You will thank me one day when you have made a proper marriage and forgotten this. Get out, Sebastian said. She stared at him. Get out of this room, get out of this house. You will go to the dower house tonight, madam, tonight, and you will not set foot under this roof again until I send for you, and I do not know when I will send for you, and it may be never. You have cost me 5 years and a son and the only happiness I have ever known, and you tell me I will thank you. Get out, before I say a thing to my own mother that cannot be unsaid across a grave, on the night before we bury my father. Get out. And the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmoor, who had governed everything for 60 years, looked at the son she had ruined out of love and pride, and found nothing in his face to appeal to, and gathered her stiff black silk about her, and went. And Sebastian stood alone by the small fire and shook, and understood that the confrontation had answered the smaller of his 2 questions and left the larger one wide open, for he knew now that there had been letters, and that his mother had kept them from him. But he did not know where they were, nor whether they survived, nor the thing that mattered above all else, whether the woman who had written them could ever in this life be brought to forgive the man who had let his pride believe he had been the one betrayed. He thought of the flat, frozen courtesy in Lucinda's voice in the lane, "Your Grace, we will not trouble you." And he thought that a woman who had written a dozen letters into silence, and borne a child alone, and been told, as she surely had been told, that her husband had cast her off and gone abroad and wanted nothing of her or her son, that such a woman had every right on earth to that frozen courtesy and worse, and that the undoing of 5 years of that particular wound was not a thing that could be accomplished by discovering the truth, or punishing his mother, or claiming his son. It could be accomplished, if at all, only slowly and humbly, and at the cost of a pride he had worn so long he was no longer certain he knew how to take it off. But he meant to learn. He sat down at last in the small hours in his dead father's cold house, and for the first time in 5 years he let himself remember the whole of it, the girl by the river, the stolen summer, the cold little church, not to torment himself, but because he understood that a man who means to mend a thing must first look, unflinching, at exactly how he broke it. He did not sleep that night, nor try to. When his mother had gone, when the last rustle of her stiff black silk had died away down the corridor, and the great house had settled back into its cold silence, Sebastian stood a long while by the dying fire, and then he took his candle and went, without deciding to a room at the top of the east wing that he had not entered in 20 years. The old nursery where he himself had been raised, and his father before him, the nursery of the Ravensmoor heirs. It was shrouded and cold, the furniture under Holland covers, the little bed in which he had slept as a child standing ghostly in the candlelight. And Sebastian stood in the doorway and thought of the boy in the lane, and of the 4 years of a small life that had been lived out in a two-roomed cottage at the edge of a parish, in poverty, on needlework and a few pence a week, when it should have been lived here. Here in this room, with a rocking horse and a nurse and every comfort a great house could give. He thought of his son learning to walk on a stony cottage floor instead of this carpet, of his son's first Christmas kept on nothing, when it should have been kept in this house with the great hall lit and the whole estate feasting, of 4 years of ordinary mornings, the first tooth and the first word and the first fall, that a father should have witnessed and had not, because the father had let his pride believe a lie and gone abroad to the wars. He set the candle on the mantel and pulled the cover off the old rocking horse and set it rocking, gently, with one hand, in the empty shrouded nursery, and the small creak of it in the silence was almost more than he could bear. And he understood, standing there, that whatever else he did or failed to do, whatever the courts decided, whether Lucinda ever forgave him or not, he would never in this life forgive himself the 4 years, for they could not be recovered, not by all the money and rank and power of Ravensmoor. They were simply gone, spent, lost, 4 years of his son's one childhood that no duke on earth could buy back. It was in that cold nursery, with the rocking horse creaking under his hand, that Sebastian Ravensmoor made the resolution that governed all the rest of his life, and made it not as a duke resolves a matter of business, but as a broken man makes a vow at a grave. That he would spend whatever remained to him, his fortune, his name, his rank, his own last drop of pride, all of it, not to undo the past which could not be undone, but to make certain that his son should have, from this day forward, every hour of a father that could still be given, and that Lucinda should have, if she could ever bring herself to take it, everything that had been stolen from her and more. And that no power in that cold house or the wide cold world should ever part the three of them again while he drew breath. He did not know, that night, how nearly impossible the keeping of that vow would prove, nor what enemies would rise to break it, nor how long and how bitter the road would be. He knew only that he had made it in the ruin of his father's house, under the eyes of the dead, and that he would keep it or die. And then, because a man who means to mend a thing must first understand exactly how it broke, because he could not go forward to Lucinda until he had gone back and looked, unflinching, at the whole of what he had done, and let be done. Sebastian sat down on the shrouded window seat of the old nursery, in the small hours of the morning before he buried his father, and let himself remember for the first time in 5 years, without the ice, without the lie, the whole of it from the beginning. The summer and the river, and the girl who had told him he was standing in her light. He had met her by the river, the summer he was 21, in the golden idle months after Oxford, and before the weight of his inheritance came down. She had been staying with an aunt in the neighborhood, Lucinda Vane, the daughter of a country physician lately dead, with no fortune and no connections, and a mind like clear water and a way of laughing that seemed to Sebastian, who had grown up in the cold, correct silence of Ravensmoor, like the first warm thing he had ever encountered. He had come upon her sketching by the water, and she had not known who he was, and had told him roundly that he was standing in her light. And he had fallen in love with her in the time it took her to say it, and had spent the whole of that summer contriving to stand in her light again, and again, until she loved him too, knowing by then exactly who he was and loving him not at all the more for it, which was the thing he had never had from anyone in his life and could not, once he had tasted it, live without. They had married in secret because they had to. Sebastian's father, the 6th Duke, would sooner have seen his heir dead than married to a physician's portionless daughter, and Sebastian, young and headstrong and certain that love would batter down any wall, had persuaded Lucinda against her own better judgment, for she had seen more of the world's hardness than he had, to marry him quietly and present the thing as done, trusting that his father, faced with an accomplished fact, would relent. They were married on a gray October morning in the little church at Nettleworth by a young curate named Mr. Fenwick, with the sexton and the sexton's wife for witnesses, and Sebastian had thought it the beginning of his life. It had been the beginning of the end of it. For his father had not relented. His father had raged, and disinherited him on the spot as to every acre and every guinea that was not strictly entailed, which was the greater part of the Ravensmoor wealth, and had sworn to leave it all to a cousin sooner than see it go to the son of a bewitched fool and a scheming nobody. And into that white heat had stepped Sebastian's mother, with her lies about money taken and her forged note and her weeping, and had pried the young husband loose from his young wife with the one lever that could move a proud man, the belief that he had been used. And Sebastian, 1 and 20 and gutted, had let himself be moved, and Lucinda had vanished, and he had gone to the wars, and that was the whole of it, the stolen summer and the cold church and the ruin, 5 years buried under ice and dug up now, at 3 in the morning in his dead father's house, by the gray amber-flecked eyes of a boy in a lane. Mr. Fenwick. Sitting in the cold small hours, Sebastian's mind fastened on the name like a drowning man on a spar, the curate who had married them. If Fenwick lived, if Fenwick remembered, if the register of the little church at Nettleworth still held the entry in its own hand, then the marriage was not a thing that could be denied or annulled or whispered away. Then Lucinda was his wife, before God and the law, and the boy Tom was his lawful son and heir, and no power in England, not his mother's will nor the world's contempt, could make it otherwise. He held to that thought through the black remainder of the night, for it was the one solid thing in a world that had dissolved. And in the morning, having buried his father with the whole cold county looking on and the dowager already gone to the dower house, he did not wait even for the funeral meats to be cleared. He rode to Nettleworth. The village had not changed. The little church stood gray and square among its yews, and the parsonage beside it, and Mr. Fenwick no longer a young curate but a settled middle-aged vicar now, stouter and grayer, came out to meet the Duke of Ravensmoor with an expression that told Sebastian, before a word was spoken, that the vicar remembered everything. "Your Grace," said Mr. Fenwick, and his kind tired face was full of a wary sorrow, "I wondered whether you would come. I have wondered these 5 years, whenever I saw the boy in the churchyard with his mother, whether the day would ever come that his father would ride up that road. I confess I had near given it up." He looked at Sebastian steadily. "I will tell your Grace at once, before you ask, that the marriage stands recorded in my register in my own hand, witnessed and regular, and that I will swear to it before any court in the land, and that I have kept it safe against exactly this day. For I never believed the tales, your Grace, not for a moment. I married 2 young people who loved each other truly, and I have watched the woman raise your son alone in poverty and grace these 5 years, and I have prayed, forgive me. I have prayed that the man who left her would one day be brought to account, and here you are, and I find I am glad of it and half afraid, for the accounting will not be easy, and she has suffered a very great deal." The words went into Sebastian like blades, each one just. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me what she has suffered. I have been lied to for 5 years, Mr. Fenwick. I believed I was made to believe that she left me for money. I learned only yesterday that it was a lie and that there was a child and that she wrote to me letters I never saw. I have come to make it right if it can be made right. But I must know the whole of it first, however it shames me, and there is no one to tell me but you." And Mr. Fenwick told him. He told him how Lucinda had come back to Nettleworth 5 years before, cast off, penniless, with no husband and no name that she could safely use. For to claim to be the secret Duchess-in-waiting of Ravensmoor when the family denied it was to invite only ruin and ridicule. How she had taken a labourer's cottage at the edge of the parish and kept herself by needlework, and by teaching the village children their letters. How her son had been born there in the deep of winter with only the midwife and the vicar's own wife by. How she had written letter after letter to Ravensmoor, to Sebastian abroad, and had them come back or not come back, and had never once had a line in answer, and had at last stopped writing, not because she ceased to hope, but because hope had become a thing she could no longer afford to feel. How she had raised the boy alone, proud and silent, refusing all charity that came with pity, taking only what she could repay in work. How she had taught the child to be honest and brave and to ask nothing of anyone, and had never once in all the vicar's hearing spoken a bitter word of the man who had abandoned them, though God knew she had cause. "She is the finest woman in this parish, your grace, and the loneliest," Mr. Fenwick finished. "And if you have come to trouble her peace and then ride away again, I beg you, on my knees if you like, ride away now today and do not begin. She has built herself a life out of almost nothing, and it is a hard, bare, honest life, and it is hers, and she has earned every stone of it. Do not take it up and shake it unless you mean to stay. She could not survive another leaving. No one could." "I mean to stay," Sebastian said. "I mean to stay if she will have me within a mile of her, and to spend the rest of my life earning what I threw away, and if she will not have me near, then I mean to see her and my son provided for and protected past any power of my family to touch them, whether she ever forgives me or not. That is what I mean, Mr. Fenwick. I know how little it is worth, said by the man who has already proved he could be talked out of her once. But it is true, and I will prove it true, however long it takes." The vicar studied him a long moment and then nodded slowly, as though something in Sebastian's ravaged face had satisfied him. "Then I will help you," he said. "God forgive me if I am wrong, but I have prayed 5 years for this, and I do not think a prayer answered comes clothed as a temptation. Go gently, your grace, go slowly, and do not whatever else you do not offer her money or rescue or the great house or any of the things a duke offers. She flung your mother's money back once and near starved for the pride of it. Offer her the only thing you never gave her and she never had. Offer her the truth plainly and your sorrow plainly, and then wait, and let her choose in her own time whether there is anything left in her that can bear to trust you. It is all you can do. It is the hardest thing in the world for a man like you to do, which is why it is the only thing that will serve." Sebastian rode back from Nettleworth that afternoon with the whole shape of his ruin laid bare before him, and, for the first time, a fixed point to steer by. And he did not yet know that his cousin Roderick Ravensmoor had arrived at the great house in his absence, in a fine travelling carriage and a state of considerable alarm, having heard already, by the swift underground telegraph of servants' gossip, that there was a boy in the neighborhood with the Ravensmoor eyes, and that Roderick, who as heir presumptive to the childless duke had spent 5 comfortable years quietly counting on Ravensmoor falling to him, was even then closeted with the family lawyer, asking a great many careful questions about the validity of secret marriages, the legitimacy of children born in obscurity, and precisely how difficult it might be, should the need arise, to prove that a physician's daughter had never been a duchess at all. The days after Nettleworth were days of quiet, grinding, secret war, though only Sebastian yet knew that a war had begun. His first thought on returning from the vicar was the letters, if his mother had kept them, and Nanny Preing's testimony and his mother's own broken half-admission convinced him that at least some had once existed. Then they might yet be in the house, and they were, he understood, the surest proof in the world. Lucinda's own hand, dated, telling the truth across 5 years, past any power of Roderick or anyone to argue away. So he searched. He searched his mother's abandoned rooms himself, by candlelight, feeling like a thief in his own house, the escritoire, the locked drawers he had a locksmith open, the Japan boxes, the very mattress and the backs of the pictures. And he found nothing, nothing at all, not one letter. And he understood at last, sitting among the ransacked drawers, that his mother had them still, that she had taken them with her to the dower house, that they were the one card she had not played and would not surrender, her last hold over the whole disaster. He could not simply take them from her. She would burn them sooner. He would have to find another way or bring her to give them up of her own will, and he could not, that autumn, imagine what on earth might ever move Augusta Ravensmoor to do such a thing. His second concern was Roderick, and Roderick was a subtler danger than the letters were a hope. His cousin had made himself thoroughly at home at the great house in the days around the funeral, all smooth condolence and family feeling, and Sebastian, who had known Roderick since they were boys and had never trusted him a yard, watched him with a wary eye and gave him nothing. But he could not prevent the servants' gossip, and he could not prevent Roderick's careful, casual, ceaseless questions, dropped into ordinary conversation like a man sounding a channel. Whether the Duke meant to marry now he had come into everything. Whether there were truth in the odd country tales of a boy in the neighborhood. How tiresome, was it not, the way the lower orders would invent connections to their betters. Sebastian answered none of it, and his silence told Roderick a great deal, and the two men circled one another through those gray days with the elaborate courtesy of duelists who have not yet named their weapons. It was on the third evening that Roderick showed, for one instant, the cold thing beneath the charm. They had dined, the two of them alone in the great echoing dining room, and over the wine Roderick had said, lightly swirling his glass, "You know, cousin, I have grown almost fond of Ravensmoor these 5 years, standing next in line to it. One does, you understand. One begins to think of it as one's own, the acres, the house, the name. Foolish, of course. You were always going to marry and get an heir and put my nose out of joint." A pause, a smile that did not touch his eyes. "Though it did seem for a while there that you might not. A man estranged from his father, gone off to the wars, no wife, no prospect of one. A man might build certain reasonable expectations on such a foundation. And it would be a hard thing, would it not, after 5 years of such expectations, to have them overturned at the last hour by some irregularity, some dubious claim. Some woman with a boy and a story. A hard thing for a man to swallow quietly. I only mention it, cousin, so that you know, as family, that I should look very closely indeed at any such claim, very closely, before I saw the succession of this ancient house handed off on the strength of a village rumor and a country parson's memory. Very closely, for the family's sake." And he had raised his glass and drunk, and the threat had hung in the candle-lit air between them, unmistakable and unretractable. And Sebastian had understood that his cousin was not merely a danger but an enemy, and a clever one, and that the fight for his son would be fought not only against the loss of the letters, but against a man who meant to keep Ravensmoor and would not scruple at much to keep it. "Look as closely as you like, Roderick," Sebastian had said, evenly. "You will find a lawful marriage and a lawful son, and you will find, I think, that I am not the man I was 5 years ago who could be talked out of what was his. Talk did that once, it will not do it again." "We shall see," Roderick had said pleasantly, and the subject had been dropped, and they had spoken of the coverts and the drainage. But the line had been drawn, and both men knew it. Between these two concerns, the hidden letters and the circling cousin, Sebastian carried a third that weighed on him more than either, and it was the counsel Mr. Fenwick had given him. Go gently, go slowly, do not offer her money or rescue or the great house, offer her only the truth and your sorrow, and then wait. It ran clean against every instinct of his rank and his nature. He was a man used to commanding, to arranging, to bringing the whole weight of Ravensmoor to bear on any obstacle until it gave way. And here was the one thing in his life that mattered above all others, and he was counseled to approach it with empty hands and infinite patience and no power at all, and to let a wronged woman decide in her own time whether she could bear him near. It was the hardest discipline he had ever set himself. He wanted to ride to the cottage that very hour and lay the whole world at her feet. He understood, because Fenwick had made him understand, that to do so would be to crush her under exactly the ducal weight she had spent 5 years learning to live without, and to prove himself, once again, a man who did what suited his own feeling without asking hers. And so he held himself back, through those gray days, and consulted his lawyer Mr. Halloway in secret about the quiet establishing of proofs, and endured Roderick's circling and searched in vain for the letters, and prepared himself, as a man prepares for the most delicate and dangerous action of a long campaign, to go at last on foot and with empty hands, and knock like a suppliant at the door of the woman he had wronged past all deserving, and begin slowly, humbly, asking nothing. The impossible work of being let back into her life. He found in those preparing days that he was not so alone in the matter as a duke commonly is in anything. For the great house, that had seemed to him on the night of his return a wasteland of frost, proved to hold, beneath its cold, correct surface, a quiet current of feeling that ran entirely against his mother and entirely toward the wronged woman at Nettleworth. And it had been running so, he learned, for years, in the silent underground way of servants who see everything and are permitted to say nothing. It was not Nanny preying alone. The old butler, M. Ravis, who had served 3 dukes and forgot nothing, let fall in the course of an ordinary morning's business that he had always thought it a black day for the house when the young master went abroad, and a blacker one for a certain young lady, and that he was glad, if his grace would pardon the liberty, to see some things looking as though they might come right at last. The housekeeper had kept all this while a small trunk of things left behind in the confusion 5 years before, a few books, a workbox, a shawl, Lucinda's things that no one had had the heart to throw out, waiting in a box room against a day no one had dared to hope for. And when Sebastian, testing the ground, let it be known below stairs that the Duke meant to acknowledge the boy at Nettleworth and set the old wrong right, the news ran through the household not as scandal but as a kind of suppressed rejoicing, as of people who have watched an injustice done under their own roof and been powerless to mend it, and are given, at last, leave to be glad. It moved him more than he expected, and it shamed him too. For these were the people his family had ruled for generations from a great cold height, and they had seen, with clearer eyes than their masters, exactly where the right and the wrong of the thing lay. They had grieved for a sewing woman at the edge of a distant parish, while the family that owned half the county called her a schemer. And their plain, unclouded judgment, offered now in 100 small silent kindnesses, the butler's dry approval, the kept trunk, the cook sending down, unasked, a basket of good things to Nettleworth by a boy who was told to say only that it came from a friend, was a truer verdict on the whole affair than any his rank had ever pronounced. Sebastian had come home believing himself the only soul at Ravensmoor who saw the truth. He found instead that the truth had been kept alive, all 5 years, in the very people his family had taught itself not to see. And he thought that there was a lesson in that which the painted dukes in the gallery had never learned, and that he had better learn it now, late as it was, for it was of a piece with everything else he had come home to understand. Before he ever knocked at her door, Sebastian learned her, the way a careful man learns hard ground before he sets foot on it, and the learning was itself a kind of penance, for every fact he gathered was a fresh reproach. He learned it chiefly from Mrs. Fenwick, the vicar's wife, a plain, kind, shrewd woman who had been at Tom's birth and had watched over Lucinda, at a respectful distance, through the whole 5 years, and who agreed to speak with the Duke only after her husband had vouched that his repentance was real. She told Sebastian, over tea in the parsonage parlor, things that he made himself hear to the end, though each one cut. That Lucinda had come back to Nettleworth in the dead of that first winter, alone, carrying the child with a few shillings and a bundle and a face, Mrs. Fenwick said, like a woman walking away from her own funeral. That she had taken the poorest cottage in the parish because it was the only one she could pay for, and had made it clean and decent by sheer force of will. That she had refused, from the first, every offer of charity that came dressed as pity, had given back a basket the squire's wife sent, with thanks, saying she would take work but not alms, and had kept herself and the child alive on needlework taken in from 3 parishes, and the few pence the village folk could pay to have their children taught their letters. That she had been ill one hard winter, and had still risen to sew because there was no one else to earn the rent. That she had never, in all that time, spoken one word against the man who had left her, nor claimed the great name that was lawfully hers, nor let the boy be pitied as fatherless, but had told him only that his father had gone far away, and had made of that bare fact something a child could live with, and had raised him proud. She is the strongest soul I ever knew, your grace, and I have buried a deal of strong souls in 40 years of a parish, Mrs. Fenwick said. But strength like that is bought dear. She has walled herself round so no one can hurt her again, and the wall keeps out the good with the bad. She has no friend, not truly, for she cannot let herself lean, having learned that leaning is how you come to grief. Only the boy gets past the wall. Everything soft that is left in her, she pours on the boy. And you, your grace, if you are minded to try and climb that wall, she looked at him steadily, you had best be very sure you mean to stay on the inside of it once you are over, for she has room in her to survive most things, but not, I think, the man who broke her once climbing in only to climb out again. That would finish her. So be sure. I am sure, Sebastian said. Then God speed you, for you will need him, said Mrs. Fenwick, and poured him more tea. He saw the boy once in those waiting days at a distance, and it undid him afresh. It was a Sunday, and Sebastian had come quietly to Nettleworth Church standing at the back, in a plain coat, drawing no iron. After the service he had watched from the shadow of the lych gate as Lucinda came out with Tom's hand in hers and stopped, as she did every week, Mrs. Fenwick had told him, at a particular grave in the corner. Her father's, the country physician, moved and buried here near the daughter who had nowhere else to belong. And Sebastian had watched his son, who did not know he was watched, crouch down and lay a few late flowers on the stone of a grandfather he had never known, gravely, in imitation of his mother. And he had watched Lucinda rest her hand a moment on the small dark head. And the two of them, the wronged woman and the fatherless boy, had stood together in the churchyard in the thin autumn sun, a family of two carved out of loss and held together by nothing but her will. And Sebastian had gripped the cold iron of the lych gate and understood, with a completeness that took his breath, exactly what his pride had cost, not in the abstract, not as a wrong to be righted, but here, in the flesh, in a small hand laying flowers on a stone and a woman's hand resting on a small head. 5 years of an ordinary tender life that should have been lived at Ravensmoor with him in it, and had been lived instead in poverty without him, and could never, never be given back. He did not go to them that Sunday. He was not ready, and neither were they, and Fenwick's counsel held him. But he carried the picture of it away with him, the two figures at the grave in the autumn light, and it burned in him through all the slow, patient siege that followed, and it was, in the end, a truer spur than any anger could have been. For a man may be talked out of anger, but no one is ever talked out of the sight of his own child laying flowers for one of a family, seen once, from the shadow of a gate. There was a night before he made his first approach, when Sebastian very nearly did not make it at all, when the whole enterprise seemed to him not courage but selfishness wearing courage's coat. For the more he learned of the hard, clean life Lucinda had built, the more he doubted his right to walk back into it. She had survived him. She had taken the wreck he made of her and built out of it something whole and honest and hers, a life narrow and bare but standing, held up by her own strength and asking nothing of anyone. And who was he, Sebastian asked himself, pacing the cold gallery at midnight under the painted eyes of his fathers, to come now, 5 years late, and take that hard-won piece in his 2 hands and shake it for his own sake, so that he might ease his own conscience and hold his own son and have his own guilt lifted, when the shaking might bring the whole of it down on her head. Fenwick had said it plainly. She could not survive another leaving. And could Sebastian swear truly, hand on heart, that he would never leave, never fail, never let some new pressure or pride or scheme talk him loose from her as the last had? He had sworn it once at 1:20 at a cold altar, and he had broken it. What was his word worth? Perhaps the kindest thing, the truly unselfish thing, was to provide for them secretly from a distance and never trouble her peace at all. To accept that some wrongs cannot be righted without inflicting a fresh wrong in the righting, and to spare her the fresh wrong by staying away. He put the whole doubt to Nanny Preing in the end, in her little room under the eaves, because she was the one soul in the house who had ever loved him plainly and would tell him plainly. And the old woman heard him out, and then she was quiet a while, and then she said a thing he carried ever after. "You're asking, my lamb, whether it's kinder to leave her be. And I'll tell you, for I've watched near 80 year of folk hurting one another and mending. There's 2 kinds of staying away. There's the staying away that costs you and spares her, and that's love, and it's a hard, holy thing, and some good souls are called to it. And there's the staying away that spares you and only looks like it spares her. That lets you off the hard, frightening work of going back and being told the truth to your face and earning what you threw away, and calls your own cowardice a mercy. And they look the same from outside, Master Sebastian, near enough the very same. But there's one way to tell them apart, and it's this. Which one is she asking for? Have you asked her? Or are you deciding all over again up here in the cold with the dead what's best for that poor woman without troubling to let her say, for that's what you did before. You let them decide for you what she was and what she wanted, and you never asked her, and it cost you 5 years Don't do it a second time under a prettier name. Go and ask her. Let her tell you to stay or go. She's earned the right to be the one that says it, hasn't she, after all she's borne? Go and put it in her hands plain and abide by what she chooses. That's not selfish, my lamb. That's the only unselfish thing left to you. The selfish thing is deciding for her, kind or cruel. It's the deciding that's the sin. And Sebastian, hearing it, knew she was right, and knew that his fine scruple about sparing her had been, at bottom, one more version of the old Ravensmoor sin, the arranging of other people's lives from a height without asking, however lovingly meant, and that the whole lesson of his ruin could be put in 6 words. He had never once asked her. So he resolved that he would go, not to command and not to rescue and not either to nobly renounce, but simply to lay the truth and himself before her, plainly, with empty hands, and let Lucinda Vane decide, for the first time in the whole sorry history of them, what she wished to do with the man who had wronged her. It was the humblest thing he had ever set himself to, and the most frightening, for it meant surrendering the last thing a duke and a proud man clings to, which is the power to choose the ending. And he lay awake the rest of that night having surrendered it, lighter and more afraid than he had ever been. And in the gray morning he put on his plainest coat and left his horse and his servants behind, and set out on foot for a cottage at the edge of Nettleworth parish, to knock like a suppliant and ask. He went to her on foot without a servant in the plainest coat he owned, so that nothing about him should shout Duke, and he knocked at her door like a suppliant, and when she opened it and saw him her face closed over at once into the flat frozen courtesy, and she said, "Your Grace has lost his way. The great house is 5 miles east," and made to shut the door. He put his hand against it, gently, not forcing it, only staying it, and said, "Lucinda, I have not come to command you or to offer you anything or to ask anything of you that you do not freely wish to give. I have come to tell you that I know the truth, all of it, that you took no money. That my mother lied to me and forged a note, and told me you had thrown me over, and that I, God forgive me, believed her and let my pride believe her, because it was easier to think myself betrayed than to fight for you against my whole family, and that you wrote to me, for years, and that I never saw one line of it because the letters were kept from me in that house, and I did not know. I swear to you before God I did not know that they existed or that you had suffered or that there was his voice failed him, that there was a child, my child, our child. I did not know, Lucinda. It does not excuse me. Nothing excuses me. I should have fought for you and I did not, and I let myself be led, and the not knowing is itself a thing I earned by my own weakness. But I did not know, and now I do. And I have come to say that I am sorry, which is a word so small against what I have cost you that I am ashamed to offer it, and to say that I am here and that I will not leave again whatever you decide about me. That is all. I will not push the door. You may close it. But I will come again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day, not to trouble you, but only so that you may know this time that the man is on the other side of the door and did not go away and will not go away, however long it takes." She stood white and rigid with her hand on the door, and she did not shut it, and she did not open it, and for a long moment the only sound was the wind in her stony garden. And then she said, in a voice that shook for the first time out of its frozen courtesy, "You do not know what you are asking. You cannot come here every day. Do you understand what it would do to me, to him? People would talk. They would say the Duke has taken up with the sewing woman at the edge of the parish, and I have spent 5 years making myself respectable out of nothing, 5 years, and you would undo it in a fortnight. And then when you tired of your penance and rode away, I should be left with even that gone. You broke me once, Sebastian. I put myself back together with my own 2 hands, and it took everything I had. I have nothing left over to be broken with a second time. So do not be kind to me. Kindness from you is the one thing I cannot survive. Go back to your great house and send a lawyer if you must provide for the boy. I will take it for his sake, though not for mine, and let that be the whole of it, and let me alone. Please." And a tear went down her rigid face, and she did not wipe it, and she shut the door softly, and Sebastian heard the bolt go home on the other side, and stood in the stony garden in the wind with his hand still half raised, and understood that Mr. Fenwick had been right, that this would be the hardest thing he had ever done, and that he had only just begun it. He came again the next day. He did not knock. He left on the doorstep a small thing, not money, not a great gift, nothing that could be flung back or shame her, but a single early rose from the Ravensmoor glasshouses laid on the stone, and he went away without seeing her. The day after he left a book, not a costly one, but a good plain edition of the poem she had loved by the river 5 years ago, when she was 21 and did not yet know what loving him would cost. The day after that, a paper of the particular sugared almonds she had liked, that he was astonished to find he remembered. Small things, daily things, left on a doorstep and abandoned, asking nothing. And slowly, very slowly, over the gray weeks of that autumn, the door began to change. She did not open it to him, but he saw some mornings that the rose of the day before had been taken in, that the book was gone from the step, that once, greatly daring, he had left a small wooden horse he had bought from a fair man for the boy, roughly carved and painted, and the next morning it too was gone, and he had ridden home almost light-headed with a hope out of all proportion to a vanished toy. He learned through the vicar's wife that Tom had the little horse always in his hand now, and would not be parted from it, and had asked who left it, and that Lucinda had said only that a friend had left it, and had not said more, but had not taken it from him. A friend. It was the smallest possible crack in 5 years of ice, and Sebastian nursed it like a coal. It was at exactly this moment, when the thing had begun with such infinite slowness to thaw, that his cousin Roderick struck the first blow. Sebastian had been aware of the danger of Roderick since the funeral, the smooth, plump, plausible man who had spent 5 years as heir presumptive, and did not mean to give up his expectations without a fight. And Roderick, for his part, had by now had the whole truth from the banished Dowager Duchess, who, furious at her exile, unrepentant, and seeing in her nephew a natural ally against the son who had cast her out, had told him everything. The secret marriage, the boy, the register at Nettleworth. Thus armed, Roderick understood at once that everything he stood to inherit hung on a single thread. The marriage register in the little church, in Mr. Fenwick's own hand, the one piece of hard, contemporaneous proof that could turn a sewing woman into a duchess and a village boy into the heir of Ravensmoor. Destroy that thread, cast doubt on that one entry, and the whole claim might be reduced to the unprovable word of a discarded woman, and a country vicar against the interest of an ancient house, and Roderick knew which way, in such a contest, the law and the world would likely lean. So Roderick went to work, as such men do, in the dark, and one gray morning, 3 weeks into Sebastian's slow siege of a bolted door, Mr. Fenwick came to the great house with a face like ash, and told the Duke of Ravensmoor that the vestry at Nettleworth had been broken into in the night, the old chest forced, and the marriage register, the register that held, in the vicar's own hand, the one unanswerable proof of Lucinda's marriage and Tom's legitimacy, was gone. Mr. Fenwick's face, when he came to the great house that gray morning to say the register was gone, told the whole of it before he spoke, and Sebastian, hearing it, felt the cold, clear fury settle over him that he had learned in 5 campaigns to trust more than any heat. He rode to Nettleworth at once and saw it for himself. The vestry door forced, the ancient parish chest splintered open, the other registers tumbled and left, for the thief had wanted one book only, and had known which, and had taken it, and nothing else, which told its own story. Whoever had done this had not been a common thief after the church plate. The plate was untouched. Someone had paid to have one particular volume, holding one particular entry, removed from the world. And there was only one man in England to whom that entry was worth a crime. Roderick, Sebastian said, standing in the wrecked vestry, and Mr. Fenwick did not contradict him. He did not go storming to his cousin, though every nerve in him wanted to. A man does not accuse where he cannot yet prove, and Roderick had been careful. Roderick was always careful, and there was nothing in the splintered chest to tie the deed to any hand. Instead, Sebastian did the harder, colder, more useful things. He sent to town for his lawyer, Mr. Halloway, and laid the whole matter before him. And Halloway, a dry, precise man, confirmed what Sebastian already feared, that the register had been the one piece of proof no advocate could argue away, the contemporaneous record of the marriage in the officiating minister's own hand, and that without it the case rested now on living testimony alone on Fenwick, who could be painted as partial, on the dead sexton's failing widow, on a midwife not yet found, on Lucinda's word and Sebastian's own, and that against the interest of an ancient house and a determined claimant. Such testimony, though it might well prevail, might also, before the wrong judge and the right barrister, fail. "It is not hopeless, your grace," Holloway said, folding his dry hands. "But it is no longer certain, and the other side has made it uncertain deliberately, and uncertainty is a weapon in itself. A man contesting a succession does not need to prove the marriage false. He needs only to make it doubtful enough that the court dare not overturn the settled order upon it. The stolen register has bought him precisely that. We must find other proof and strong the missing letters above all if they exist and can be got, or find the register itself, or find the man who took it and make him name who paid him. Any of the three would serve. None will be easy." Sebastian set his inquirymen to all three at once, and spared no money, and through the following weeks they gnawed at the edges of it, traced the forced chest to a crowbar bought in the market town, traced a stranger who had lodged one night at the Ravensmoor Arms and gone before dawn, traced a hired ruffian's description to a coaching inn 20 miles off, and there lost him, the trail going cold at exactly the point where careful money had been spent to cool it. It was maddening, slow, inconclusive work, and it hung over everything. But the thing that gnawed at Sebastian worse than the lost register was the timing of it, and what the timing threatened. For the theft had come, as if by a malice that could see into his heart, at the very moment the impossible had begun, at the very moment the ice around Lucinda had shown, for the first time, the smallest crack, when a door that had been bolted against him for weeks had, 2 days before, stood open, when his son had run into a stony garden and demanded a whistle and been given one. Something had begun to thaw. Sebastian had ridden home from that garden 2 nights before the theft with a hope in him, so fragile he had hardly dared breathe on it. And now, before that hope could put out a single leaf, Roderick had struck, not at Sebastian, whom he could not reach, but at the proof, the foundation, the very ground the new thing might have grown in. And Sebastian understood, with a dread that was worse than the fury, that the theft was not merely a legal blow but a threat to the fragile living thing itself, for Lucinda was not a fool, and Lucinda would grasp at once what the loss of the register meant. That it meant a fight, a long, public, ruinous fight, of exactly the kind she had built her whole quiet life to avoid. And that the news of it might frighten her, not toward him, but away, back behind her wall, back into the safe bare loneliness that had kept her and the boy alive. And that everything, now hung on whether a woman who had learned 5 years ago that hoping was how you came to grief could be persuaded to hope, and fight, one more time. The theft of the register changed everything, and it changed it, cruelly, at the very moment the ice had begun to melt. For the ice had begun to melt. It had begun in the smallest ways over the gray weeks of the siege, the taken-in rose, the vanished book, the wooden horse the boy would not put down, and then, as the autumn deepened, in larger ones. The bolt on the cottage door that had shot home so firmly on his first visit was drawn back one raw evening and left drawn, and Sebastian, coming with his daily small offering, had found not a closed door but Lucinda standing in the open one, wary and pale, who said only that he might as well come in out of the wet as stand in the garden like a beggar, and that there was tea, weak tea, and he need not look as though she had offered him the moon. He had gone in and sat at her small scrubbed table, and the boy had shown him the wooden horse and the whistle and a bird's nest he was keeping, and Lucinda had watched the two of them from the hearth with an expression Sebastian could not read and did not dare interpret too hopefully. And it had been, for all its wariness, the first hour in 5 years that the three of them had spent together under a roof, and Sebastian had walked home through the dark not feeling the rain. There had been other evenings after that. Not many and not easy. She would thaw and then, frightened by her own thawing, freeze again, and he learned to bear the freezing without despair, understanding it for what it was, the flinch of a creature that has been struck and cannot help expecting the next blow. But the evenings came. He learned to make himself useful in small ways she could not refuse without churlishness, mending the sagging gate, splitting the kindling she had been splitting herself, bringing, once, a load of good dry logs when the cottage chimney had smoked all week on green wood, and taking in payment, at her stiff insistence, a shirt of his she had offered to turn the collar of, so that no charity should pass between them unearned. It was a strange courtship, conducted in kindling and mended gates and turned collars, with never a word of love spoken, for love was the one country neither of them dared yet enter. But it was a courtship, and they both knew it, and the knowing hung sweet and terrible in the air of the little cottage. And there came one afternoon, a bright cold afternoon in the last of the autumn, a stolen scrap of gold between the gray, that Sebastian kept ever after among the treasures of his life. Lucinda had a half-holiday from her sewing, and the boy had begged to go to the river, and somehow, without any of them quite deciding it, the three of them had gone together, down through the bare fields to the very water where, 5 years and a lifetime ago, a girl had told a young man he was standing in her light. Tom ran ahead with a fishing line Sebastian had made him and caught nothing and did not care. And Sebastian and Lucinda walked behind, slowly, along the bank, not touching, a careful foot of cold air between them, and for a little while they talked, not of the past, not of the lawsuit gathering over their heads, not of anything that mattered, but only of small things, the boy, the river, a heron that rose from the reeds, the way the light lay on the water. And it was, in its very ordinariness, the most precious conversation of Sebastian's life, for it was the conversation of two people who might, in another and kinder world, simply have been a husband and wife walking by a river with their son, and had been robbed of 10,000 such ordinary afternoons, and were being given, by some mercy, this one. Once Lucinda stopped and looked at the water a long while and said, "Lo, not to him exactly. I used to bring him here when he was very small. When things were at their worst, I would carry him down and sit on that stone there and tell him." She stopped, and her voice was not steady. "I would tell him his father was a good man who had gone far away, and that one day he might come back, because I could not bear to tell him the truth, which I did not know, and could not bear to make him hate a man I had not the heart to teach him to hate. And I would sit here and watch the water and think that it went down at last to the sea, all the grief of it, downstream and gone, and that a person could bear anything if she only kept her eyes on the water and let it carry the grief away." She turned and looked at Sebastian, and her eyes were bright. "And here you are, on the same stone, 5 years late. I do not know what to do with you, Sebastian, I truly do not. I have carried so much grief down this river that I do not know what is left in me for anything else. But I know that I brought our son here to grieve, and that today I have brought him here and there has been no grieving, only a heron and a fishing line and a good cold afternoon, and that I have you to thank for it. And I do not want to thank you, and I do thank you, and I am too tired to make the two of those agree." And Sebastian had not touched her. He had wanted to more than he had wanted anything, and had not dared, but he had said very quietly, "Keep your eyes on the water, Lucinda. Let the old grief go down to the sea. I am not asking you to forgive me today or ever if you cannot. I am only asking you to let there be, now and then, an afternoon with no grieving in it. That is all. One afternoon, and then another, and we will see, in time, what is left in you for anything else, and there is no hurry, and I am not going anywhere." And she had looked at him, and nodded once and turned back to the water, and they had stood together on the same stone in the failing gold light while their son fished and caught nothing, and it had been, Sebastian thought, the nearest thing to happiness he had known in 5 years, and he had carried it home cupped in his 2 hands like fire against the wind. It was 2 mornings after that stolen golden afternoon that the will-o'-whistle happened, the boy running into the garden to demand whether it was truly he who had left the horse, and Sebastian down on one knee in the mud cutting a whistle from a green stick with his own hands, while Lucinda watched from the doorway with her hand pressed to her mouth, and did not send him away. And it was 2 mornings after that that the register was gone, and the whole fragile thing was flung into the fire. Roderick moved swiftly, and in the open now, for the covert theft had been but the first half of his campaign, and the rest he meant to conduct in daylight, dressed as concern for the family and respect for the law. He came to Sebastian smooth, grave, regretful, and said that painful rumors were abroad, that the Duke was said to be entangling himself with a woman of the parish who made scandalous claims of a secret marriage and a legitimate heir, that there was not, and never had been, any proof of such a marriage, that the register some spoke of appeared, conveniently, to have vanished, and that if Sebastian attempted to force this boy upon the family as his heir, he, Roderick, would be compelled, with the deepest reluctance, purely to protect the name, to contest it in the courts publicly to the last penny and the last day, and to lay before the world every particle of doubt that could be raised against the woman's character and the child's legitimacy. "Think, cousin, what such a suit would mean," he said softly, his eyes cold. "Years in chancery. The woman's name dragged through every newspaper in the kingdom. The boy branded before the whole world as a bastard got on a scheming nobody. Even if you won, and without the register you would very likely lose, you would destroy them both in the winning. Better, surely, to provide for the woman quietly and let the succession pass as nature and the law intend. I say it only for the family's good, and for hers, cousin, truly, for hers." It was masterly, and it was poison, and Sebastian saw the whole of it and could not, for the moment, answer it, because the worst of it was true. Without the register, a suit would be long and doubtful and ruinous, and would drag Lucinda and Tom through a public hell whether it succeeded or failed. Roderick had found the one lever that could still move a man who no longer cared what happened to himself. And Lucinda understood it too, faster than Sebastian and more coldly. Word of Roderick's threats reached her within the day, and when Sebastian came to the cottage that evening, meaning to reassure her, he found her not frozen and not thawing, but simply, terribly decided. "You must let us go," she said before he had crossed the garden. "Listen to me, Sebastian, and do not argue. Your cousin means to fight, and without the register he will very likely win, and even if he loses he will drag Tom's name and mine through every gutter in England for years, and my son will grow up known to the whole world as the bastard a duke was tricked into half-owning. I will not have it. I would rather he grew up a poor, honest sewing woman's son with no father at all than a duke's disputed byblow argued over in the newspapers. The very thing you want to claim him, to set it all right in the open, is the thing that would ruin him now, because it can only be done by a public fight, and the fight itself is the ruin, whoever wins, so there is no setting it right. There is only choosing which harm, and I choose the quiet one. Let us go. Provide for us secretly if your conscience needs it, and let Roderick have his inheritance and his silence, and let Tom grow up unbranded and safe and out of it all. It is the only gift left that you can give us, the gift of letting go, this time on purpose for his sake. You could not do it 5 years ago when you should have fought. Do it now when fighting would only destroy us. Let us go." And Sebastian stood in the stony garden in the dusk and understood that she was, by every cold measure of the world, entirely right. That Roderick had built a trap with no floor to it, and that Lucinda, who had already lost everything once, was choosing now, clear-eyed, to lose it again on her own terms rather than watch her son torn apart in the winning of him. It was the bravest and most terrible thing he had ever heard anyone say, and it was surrender, and it would take from him forever the wife and son he had only just begun to reach. He said, his voice was very quiet. "No, Lucinda, I let you go once because I was too proud and too weak to fight for you against my own family, and I have paid for it with 5 years, and I will not do it again. Not to spare myself pain, and not this time even to spare you pain, because I have learned at last that letting you go is not the gentle thing it pretends to be. It is only the coward's thing wearing the gentle thing's coat. There is a floor to Roderick's trap. There is always a floor. He thinks he has the only proof because he has stolen the register. He is wrong. A marriage is not made by a book, the book only records it. There were witnesses, Fenwick, the sexton's widow, living people who saw us wed. There was a midwife who saw our son born. There are the letters you wrote in your own hand, if any survive. And there is a man who broke into a church in the night, and men who do such things can be found and made to give up who paid them. Roderick has not closed the trap. He has only made it harder. And I am done, Lucinda, wholly and forever done, with choosing the easier harm because the harder good costs me too much. I will not let you go. I will fight in the open for as long and as hard as it takes, and I will make you my duchess and my son my heir before the whole world, whatever it costs me, however long the courts drag it. and if you cannot forgive me I will do it still and set you free the day it is won and trouble you no more. But I will not let that man frighten us into the dark a second time. Never again. I would sooner die." Lucinda did not answer his great vow at once. She stood in the dusk of the stony garden and looked at him a long while after he had said he would sooner die than let them be frightened into the dark a second time, and Sebastian could not tell what moved behind her still white face. And then she said only, "Lo, you are a fool, Sebastian. You were always a fool. It is the thing I first loved in you and the thing that has cost me everything." But there was no ice in it now. There was something almost like the old warmth, worn and weary and half afraid of itself, and she did not tell him again to let them go. She turned and went into the cottage and shut the door, but she did not bolt it, and Sebastian stood in the garden and heard, through the thin door, that she was weeping, not the silent, tearing weeping of the lane, but a softer, deeper sound, the weeping of something long frozen beginning, painfully, to break up. And he did not go in, for she had not asked him in, but he sat down on the cold stone of her doorstep and stayed there through the whole of that dark autumn night, saying nothing, doing nothing, only being there on the other side of the unbolted door, so that if she looked out at dawn she should know that this time the man had not gone away. And at dawn she did look out and found him there, stiff and gray with cold, and looked at him a moment, and did not send him off, but said gruffly that he had better come in before he took the fever and made more trouble, and there was porridge, and he might as well eat since he had ruined a good night's sleep sitting on her step like a stray dog. And Sebastian went in and ate porridge at her table with his son across from him, and it was the first meal the three of them had ever eaten under one roof, and none of them spoke of it, and it was, Sebastian thought, the finest breakfast of his life. So the thing went forward, on two fronts at once, and the fronts pulled against each other cruelly. On the one, the slow, painful, deepening warmth between the cottage and the man who would not go away, Lucinda thawing by inches, letting him come, letting him teach the boy to fish and whittle and name the birds, letting him, once, when the day was hard, weep at her table over the years he had lost, and not despising him for it. The two of them circling, warily, back towards something that neither dared yet call by its name. And on the other, the gathering storm of the fight for Roderick, seeing the thaw, and seeing that Sebastian meant to press his claim in earnest, threw off the last of his family-feeling mask and went to open war. He did it as such men do, through the newspapers and the drawing-rooms rather than the open field. Paragraphs began to appear in the county paper and then the London sheets, never quite naming anyone, always couched as rumor and concern, about a great northern house, a disputed succession, a low-born woman advancing extraordinary claims upon a bereaved duke, a boy of doubtful origin, then less delicate ones, then coarse ones. Lucinda's poverty, her obscurity, her years living unwed under a pretension the family denied, all of it laid before a public greedy for a ducal scandal and dressed by Roderick's hired pens in the ugliest colors. And Sebastian watched her read them, for she would read them, she would not be shielded, and watched her flinch, and watched the wall she had spent 5 years building shake under the assault, and hated Roderick with a cold completeness that frightened him. The village, to its lasting credit, closed round her. Nettleworth folk who had watched Lucinda Vane sew by candlelight and teach their children and hold her head up through 5 hard years, did not care what the London papers said, and said so roundly in the tap-room and the market. And Mr. Fenwick preached, one Sunday, on the woman taken and the stones not thrown, and looked hard at certain empty pews as he did it. But the county's great houses were another matter, and there the poison did its work, and doors that might have opened to the new Duchess closed before she was even made one. And Sebastian saw that Roderick was fighting not only to win a lawsuit but to make the winning of it worthless, to ensure that even if Lucinda were proved 100 times his lawful wife, she should enter Ravensmoor branded, whispered of, unreceived, exactly as she had foreseen. And that this, the poisoning of the victory itself, was the cruelest and cleverest stroke of all. Lucinda bore it. She bore it as she had borne everything, with a straight back and a still face. But Sebastian saw what it cost her, and saw the old terror rising in her, the fear not for herself but for the boy, that all this filth was being flung about his small, unknowing head, that he would grow up to read it, that the very fight to give him his name was blackening the name in the giving. And there came an evening as the autumn hardened toward winter and the paragraphs grew fouler, when Sebastian feared she was near breaking again toward flight, when he saw in her face, across the cottage fire, the old calculation returning, the weighing of which harm to choose. He did not yet know how the storm would break. He knew only that it was gathering to a head, that something must give, and soon. And he did not dream, sitting by her fire that hard evening watching the fear return to her eyes, that the thing about to give was not the lawsuit nor the woman's courage nor his own resolve, but the small strong body of the boy asleep in the next room, in whom, even then, the first unnoticed heat of the fever had begun to kindle. Once, in the worst of that gathering storm, Sebastian swallowed his pride and went to the dower house to ask his mother for the letters. He had sworn he would not send for her, and he did not. He went to her, which was harder, and stood in the small, overwarm room where the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmoor sat out her banishment among the relics of her long dominion, and he asked her plainly, without heat, for the one thing that could end the whole ruinous fight at a stroke. Lucinda's letters, which he knew she had, which he knew she kept, which would prove past any court the marriage and the child and the truth that would break Roderick's case to splinters. She refused him. She did not refuse in anger. She refused in a cold, still, terrible calm that was worse than any rage, the calm of a woman who has staked her whole self on being right and cannot now afford, at the last, to be found wrong. "If I give you those letters," she said, "I confess before the world that I lied, that I hid, that I schemed against my own son and kept his wife and child in poverty 5 years. I will not do it. I am too old to be disgraced, Sebastian, and I will not spend the last of my life as the wicked woman in a newspaper tale. Let Roderick have Ravensmoor if it comes to that. He is at least of the blood, and he will keep the name grand, which is more than can be said for a duke who parades a sewing woman as his duchess. I did what I did for the family. I will not now destroy myself to undo it. You may search this house to the boards, you will not find them, for they are where you will never look, and there they will stay. I am sorry for you, Sebastian, I am. You are always too soft, and softness in a great house is a kind of cruelty, for it costs more in the end than any hardness. But I will not be your proof. Go home. Marry the woman if you must, and fight your cousin if you must, but do it without me, for I have given this family 60 years, and I have nothing left to give it but my silence, and that I will keep." And Sebastian had looked at his mother a long moment, the small, stiff, implacable old woman who had ruined his life out of love and pride, and could not, even now, tell the two of them apart. And he had understood that there was no lever in the world that could move her, that she was frozen past all thawing, and that he must fight without the letters, on the strength of living witnesses and doubtful memory against Roderick's careful poison. And he had bowed to her, coldly, and gone out, and ridden home through the early dark with the last easy hope extinguished. He did not know, could not have dreamed, that the one lever that could move the unmovable had not yet been applied, and that it was not in his gift or any man's, but lay sleeping and innocent in a cottage at the edge of Nettleworth parish, in the small hot body of a boy who was, though no one yet knew it, beginning to sicken. And that it would take the near death of her own grandchild, and nothing less, to break at last the 60-year frost of Augusta, Dowager Duchess of Ravensmoor, and wring from her the confession and the letters both. The fight, meanwhile, ground on, and it ground toward winter, and it did not go well. Sebastian threw the whole weight of Ravensmoor into it, Halloway and his clerks, the inquiry-men still hunting the stolen register and the vanished midwife, barristers retained in town, and against it all Roderick fought with the patience of a man defending a fortune, conceding nothing, delaying everything, and keeping up all the while the drip of poison in the papers that turned public opinion sour. There were days Sebastian came near despair, days when Halloway's dry reckonings made the case look thin as paper, days when the ugliest paragraph yet would appear, and he would find Lucinda white and silent over it, and would have to sit with her and say nothing, because there was nothing true he could say that was also comforting. What held them through those gray grinding weeks was not hope of winning. The winning looked further off each day, but the small stubborn warmth that had kindled in the cottage and would not go out. The shared suppers, the boy's laughter, the man teaching the child the 100 small things a father teaches, the woman thawing by painful inches toward the possibility of trusting again. It was little enough to set against the gathering storm. But it was real and it was theirs, and Sebastian held to it. And he did not know in the black heart of that autumn how soon and how terribly that little warmth would be tested, nor that the test, when it came, would burn away in 3 days everything that 5 years of pride and lies had frozen, and leave in the ashes the beginning of the truth at last. The fight went badly, and it went badly in the particular grinding way of a cause that is just but cannot be proved. Mr. Fenwick would swear to the marriage, and did, without hesitation, but Roderick's men were quick to paint the vicar as a partisan, an old friend of the abandoned woman, a man with every motive to remember a wedding that suited his sympathies. The sexton who had witnessed the marriage was dead these 3 years, and his widow, an old woman now and failing, could be led in her testimony this way, and that until it was worth little in law. The register was gone. And Roderick, defending his fortune with the patience of a spider, conceded nothing and delayed everything, and kept up all the while the drip of poison in the papers. Sebastian's one real advance, that grim autumn, was the midwife. His inquiry-men, after weeks of hunting, ran her to earth at last in a manufacturing town far to the north, where she had gone to live with a married daughter, a stout, sensible woman named Mrs. Combe, who remembered the birth of Tom perfectly, having attended it, and who was entirely willing to swear that she had brought into the world, in a cottage at Nettleworth on a winter's night 5 years past, the son of a young gentlewoman who called herself the wife of a nobleman gone to the wars, and who had wept in her pains not for herself, but that the child's father was not there to know of him. Sebastian brought Mrs. Combe south at his own charge and lodged her safe and had her deposition taken, and for a few days he let himself hope, for here was an honest, disinterested witness the other side could not so easily smear. But Halloway, dry and just, warned him not to build too high on it. A midwife could swear to a birth but not to a marriage. She could prove that Lucinda had borne a child and called herself a wife, but not that she was one. And Roderick's barristers would say, and say plausibly, that many a ruined woman has called herself a wife to save her shame. It helped. It was not enough. Nothing without the register or the letters was enough, and Roderick knew it and grew, as the weeks passed and his poison did its work in the drawing-rooms of the county, quietly, insufferably, confident. There were days that autumn Sebastian came near despair, days when Halloway's dry reckonings made the case look thin as paper, days when the ugliest paragraph yet would appear, and he would find Lucinda white and silent over it, days when the whole vast machinery of his rank and wealth seemed to avail nothing at all against a stolen book and a careful liar. What held him through those gray grinding weeks was not hope of winning, for the winning looked further off each day, but the small stubborn warmth that had kindled in the cottage and would not go out, the shared suppers, the boy's laughter, the man teaching the child the 100 small things a father teaches, the woman thawing by painful inches toward the possibility of trusting again. It was little enough to set against the gathering storm, but it was real and it was theirs, and Sebastian held to it. And then in the black heart of that autumn, the fever came to Nettleworth, and it took Tom. It came as such things came in those years, swift and without warning, a flush, a heat, a child too quiet by the fire of an evening, and by the deep of night a small body burning and raving in a low cottage bed, and the doctor from the market town shaking his head and speaking of the crisis that would come in 3 days and turn one way or the other, and nothing to be done but nurse and wait and pray. Lucinda sent for no one. She had learned in 5 hard years to send for no one. But the vicar's wife knew, and word reached the great house before dawn, and Sebastian was in the saddle and at the cottage door within the hour, and this time Lucinda did not turn him away. She was past turning anyone away. She stood in the low doorway, gray with terror, her son burning behind her, and she looked at the man who had ruined and abandoned her, and all the ice and all the wariness were simply gone, burned away by a mother's fear, and she said only, "He is so hot, Sebastian. He is so hot and he does not know me. Help me. I cannot do this one alone, not this one, help me." And Sebastian went in, and for 3 days and 3 nights the Duke of Ravensmoor did not leave that cottage. He sent for everything money could bring, the best physician in the county, ice, medicines, whatever the doctors named. But the bringing of things was the least of it. The most of it was the long dark hours at the bedside, the endless sponging of the small burning body, the holding of the boy when the fever made him thrash and cry, the sitting through the black middle of the night when hope thinned to a thread. And through all of it he and Lucinda worked side by side over their son, hardly speaking, past the need of speaking. Two people who had wrecked each other, bound now in the one thing that could not be wrecked or taken or argued in any court, the shared and desperate love of the child between them. Sebastian held Tom through the worst of the second night, the boy's hot cheek against his shoulder, the gray eyes fever-bright and unseeing, and he thought that he had never once in his life held his son until this hour, that he had missed the whole of it, the first steps and the first words in 4 years of ordinary mornings, and that he might now be given the boy only long enough to hold him while he died. And he bowed his head over the small burning body and wept silently in the dark, and felt Lucinda's hand come to rest, for the first time in 5 years, on his shoulder, not in forgiveness, not yet, but in the simple animal comfort of two creatures suffering the same unbearable thing, and they kept the vigil so together, until the gray came up at the window. The crisis broke on the third night. It broke the right way. Somewhere in the small hours the burning eased, and the boy fell all at once into a deep true sleep, his breathing loosening, the terrible heat draining out of him. And the physician, feeling his pulse, straightened and said quietly that the worst was past, that the child would live, that he wanted only rest and care now and time. And Lucinda, who had not wept once in 3 days, put her face in her hands and broke. And Sebastian gathered her against him without thinking, and she let him. And they stood so in the gray dawn over their sleeping son, holding each other up, both of them shaking, and it was not the beginning of forgiveness exactly, but it was the ground that forgiveness would in time be able to grow in, which is a rarer and more precious thing. "I could not have borne it alone," Lucinda whispered against his coat. "I have borne everything alone for 5 years, and I could not have borne that. I am glad you were here. God help me, after everything, I am glad you were here." "I will always be here," Sebastian said. "Whatever comes, whatever the courts do, whatever you decide about me, I will always, always be here. I have learned that much at the last and terrible end of learning it. I will never again be anywhere but here." And it was into that fragile gray dawn, while the boy slept and his parents stood clinging together over him, that the turn came at last. From the one quarter Sebastian would never have looked to, for a carriage came up the lane in the early light, and stopped at the cottage, and out of it, leaning on her stick, small and stiff and terrible, came the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmoor. She had heard, the whole country had heard by now, that the boy with the Ravensmoor eyes lay dying of the fever, and something in the old woman, some last unfrozen chamber of a heart that had spent 60 years hardening in the service of the family's pride, had cracked at the news, for the boy who lay dying was her grandson, whatever she had told herself, her own blood wearing her own eyes. And Augusta, Dowager Duchess of Ravensmoor, had passed the worst night of her long hard life alone in the dower house, and had come at dawn, uninvited and unsure of her welcome, driven by a thing she had spent a lifetime refusing to feel. She stood in the cottage doorway and looked at her son and the woman he had married and the small sleeping boy beyond them, and her rigid face worked, and she said, in a voice Sebastian had never heard from her, thin and old and afraid, "Does he live?" "They said he was dying. Does the boy live?" "He lives," Sebastian said. "The crisis broke an hour ago. He will live, madam, no thanks to you." The dowager flinched, and did not defend herself, which was itself so strange, so wholly unlike her, that Sebastian stared. And then the old woman came a step into the room, and fumbled in the black reticule she carried, her gnarled hands shaking, and drew out a thick packet, tied with a faded ribbon, worn at the edges as though it had been handled many times in secret. And she held it out toward Lucinda, not toward her son, and she said the thing that broke the whole case of Roderick Ravenscar to pieces and could never be taken back. "I kept them," she said. "God forgive me, I kept them. I told him you never wrote. I told him for 5 years you never sent a word. And every letter you ever sent is here, every one. I never burned a single one, though I meant to 100 times and could not, and I never knew why I could not until this night, when they told me the boy was dying and I understood at last what I had done. They are all here, Lucinda, in your hand, dated. The marriage, the child, everything you wrote to my son that I hid from him. Take them. They will prove all of it, past any court, past Roderick, past anything. I have been a wicked, proud, hard old woman, and I have destroyed the one good thing my son ever had, and I cannot undo it, but I can give you these, and I can tell the truth at last in a witness box or anywhere you please that I lied and I hid and I schemed, and that this is your husband's lawful wife and this is his lawful son, and that I knew it the whole time. Take them. And do not," her voice cracked entirely, "do not let the boy grow up not knowing his grandmother came in the end and told the truth. Even if it is too late, even if you never forgive me, let me have told the truth before the end." Lucinda took the packet. Her hands, that had been so steady through 3 days of fever, shook now as she untied the faded ribbon and looked at the letters. Her own letters, a dozen and more of them, 5 years of her heart poured out into a silence she had believed absolute. Kept all that time in the reticule of the very woman who had built the silence in, she read the first few lines of the topmost one, and made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, and looked up at Sebastian with her whole face undone. "They are mine," she whispered. "They are the ones I wrote. This one I wrote the week I knew about Tom. I remember every word of it. I begged you to come. I told you I did not care about the money or your father or any of it. Only come, and we will manage. And you never." She turned to the dowager, and there was no fury in her face now, only a vast and terrible wonder. "You kept it. 5 years, in your bag, you read it. You knew I was carrying his child and alone, and you kept it, and you told him I had thrown him over. How could you? How could anyone? He was your son. Tom is your grandson. How could you?" "Because I loved the name more than the people who bore it," the dowager said, and it came out of her flat and dreadful and true, the confession of a lifetime. "And that is the whole of my sin, and I have only understood it tonight, too late, watching a fire nearly take a boy I had refused to know. I loved Ravensmoor more than I loved my son's happiness, and I told myself the two were the same, and they were never the same, and I have burned my whole life on that lie and very nearly burned his and yours and the child's with it. I do not ask you to forgive me. I have not come for that. I have come to make what is left of it right in the only way I can, and then to take myself out of your sight, for I am the last person on earth who has any right to stand in this room." And she made as if to go. "No," said Lucinda. Everyone stilled. Sebastian looked at his wife. "No," Lucinda said again, and she was weeping, but her voice was clear. "You will not go and be a martyr in the dower house and leave us to hate you in comfort. That is too easy, and it is one more kind of pride, and I have had a bellyful of the Ravensmoor pride, all its kinds. You will stay. You will help me nurse your grandson well. You will teach him, God help us all, to be proud in the right things and humble in the rest, since you have learned so late and so hard the difference and can at least warn him off your own road. And you will stand up in whatever court is needful and tell the truth you have told us tonight, loudly, before the whole world, and take the shame of it in the open, which is a far harder penance than hiding in a dower house and calling it remorse. That is what you will do. Not because I forgive you. I do not know yet whether I can, and I will not cheapen the word by saying it before I mean it. But because there is a child in that bed who has just been given back his life, and he is going to need a grandmother, and you are the only one he has, and I will not let your pride rob him of one more thing than it has robbed him of already. Sit down. You look ready to fall. Sit down and be his grandmother, and let us begin, all of us, the long business of becoming a family, which we should have begun 5 years ago, and did not and can begin now if we are brave enough. Sit down." and the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmoor, who had governed everything for 60 years, sat down in a sewing woman's cottage and put her face in her gnarled hands and wept as she had not wept since she was a girl, and Sebastian looked at his wife across the room, for she was his wife. The letters proved it past all doubt. She had always been his wife and understood that Lucinda Vane had more true greatness in her than the whole gallery of painted dukes at Ravensmoor put together, and that he had married, at 1 and 20 by a river, so far above himself that it had taken him 5 years and a stolen son, and a near grave to begin to comprehend it. The letters ended everything. Roderick's careful case, built on the absence of proof, collapsed in an afternoon before a dozen letters in Lucinda's dated hand and the sworn confession of the Dowager Duchess herself. And when Sebastian's inquiry-men, emboldened and better funded, at last traced the stolen register through the hired ruffian to a certain discreet payment, and the payment to a bank, and the bank to Roderick Ravenscar, the collapse became a rout. Confronted with the whole of it, the theft, the bribery, the conspiracy, Roderick did what such men do when the calculation finally turns against them. He folded, utterly, and bargained. He would restore the register, which he had not destroyed only because a careful man keeps his weapons until he is sure he no longer needs them. He would renounce, in writing, every claim to the succession. He would leave the country and not return, in exchange for Sebastian's forbearance from a prosecution that would have seen him transported. Sebastian let him go, not out of mercy, but because a public trial would have dragged Lucinda and Tom through exactly the mire they had all suffered so much to spare them. And Roderick Ravenscar sailed for the continent a ruined and friendless man, his 5 comfortable years of expectation turned to ash, humbled not by the law but by the one thing his cold calculation had never reckoned on: that a proud duke might, in the end, love truth and his own child more than his name, and fight for them past all self-interest and win. They were married again properly, openly, in the great church of Ravensmoor with the whole county looking on, for though the secret marriage stood valid in law, Sebastian would not have his wife's honor rest on a disputed register a moment longer than it must, and so they stood up together a second time before God and man and the world, and let there be no doubt in any mind forever. Lucinda came up the aisle in a gown that was not mended and not gray, and Sebastian watched her come and thought of a girl sketching by a river who had told him he was standing in her light, and understood that he had spent his whole life since trying to earn his way back into that light, and had very nearly thrown away the last chance of it, and had been given it back only by a mercy he had done nothing to deserve. And he took her hand at the altar and found he could not speak for a moment, and she smiled at him, and it was the laughing girl again beneath the woman the years had made, and she said, very low, so only he could hear, "You are standing in my light again, your grace." And he laughed and wept both at once before the whole county and did not care. Forgiveness, when it came, did not come all at once, and Sebastian did not ask it to. Lucinda had been too deeply wounded for the wound to close overnight, and there were nights in the first year when the old grief rose up in her and she could not look at him, and he learned to sit with it and wait and not defend himself and not despair, for he had learned at last that love is not the grand gesture at the altar but the long patient staying, the being there in the black middle of the night, the not going away however hard the going would be easier, and staying, he earned it. Slowly across that first year and the next, the frozen courtesy that had met him in the lane melted entirely and did not come back, and was replaced by something deeper and harder one than the easy passion of their stolen summer, a love that had been broken and buried and dug up and mended, and was the stronger at the mended places, the way a healed bone is stronger than one that was never broken. She forgave him. She told him so at last on an ordinary evening by their own fire, not as a grand absolution but as a plain fact she had arrived at, that she had stopped, some while since, holding it against him, and had not noticed the exact hour it left her, only that it was gone. And Sebastian held that too, like the whistle thanks and the hand on his shoulder in the fever dark, among the treasures of his life. Tom grew up at Ravensmoor, the acknowledged heir in the great house that should always have been his, with his willow whistle and his wooden horse captain kept on a shelf in his own room long after he was too old for them. Because they were, he said, the first things his father ever gave him, and he would not have them put away. He grew up fearless and honest and quick, as he had begun, taught by a mother who had raised him alone in a stony garden to ask nothing of anyone, and to love what was true and say it though the heavens fell, and by a father who had learned the cost of pride the hardest way a man can learn it and was determined his son should learn it cheaper. And between the two of them, the boy grew into a man the old painted dukes in the gallery might have envied, for he had their gray, amber-flecked eyes, and none of their coldness, having been forged instead in a warmth they had never known. The Dowager Duchess lived out her years at Ravensmoor after all, not banished, as she had expected and half wished, but kept held to the harder penance Lucinda had set her, of becoming, late and clumsily and against the grain of 60 proud years, a grandmother. She was never an easy woman, she died as sharp as she had lived. But she loved the boy, fiercely and at last without calculation, and he loved her back with the uncomplicated forgiveness of the young who have not been told the whole story, and in the loving of him, something in the old woman that had been frozen since her own girlhood came, very slowly, back to a kind of life. And when she died, some years on, it was Tom who wept longest at her grave, and Lucinda who had, by then, truly forgiven her, having watched the hard old heart soften year by year in the warmth of the very child it had once denied. It was, Sebastian thought, standing at his mother's grave with his wife's hand in his and his son at his side, the strangest and most complete of all the humblings that love had worked upon that proud house. Not the ruin of Roderick, who had deserved it, but the slow redemption of Augusta, who had not, and had been given it anyway, because a woman she had wronged past bearing had chosen mercy over the easier justice, and let a hard old heart learn, before the end, the one lesson it had spent a lifetime refusing. And on the summer evenings, when the work of the great estate was done, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmoor walked down together, as they liked to do, to the river where they had met, where a girl had once told a young man he was standing in her light-hand. Sometimes their son came with them and ran ahead along the bank with a fishing line and the endless energy of his years, and sometimes they went alone, and stood at the water in the long gold light with the swifts screaming overhead, older now, and marked by everything and quiet. And Sebastian would take his wife's hand, the hand that had sown by candlelight and dug a garden out of stony ground, and nursed their son through the fever dark and been laid, once, on his shoulder in the worst hour of his life. And he would think of the 5 years he had thrown away to pride and lies, and of the boy in the lane with his own eyes who had cracked the ice of it all with a bunch of harebells, and a demand for a whistle. And he would think that a man may be given, if he is very fortunate and very humbled and very slow to give up, a second beginning to a life he had ruined, not a second chance to have the first life over, for that is gone and cannot be recalled, but something rarer and better, a whole new life grown up out of the wreck of the old one, deeper rooted for the wreck, and dearer for having been so nearly lost. And he would draw her close and she would let him, and the river would go on past them in the gold light toward the sea, carrying its 5 years and its griefs and its mended love away downstream, and Sebastian Ravenscar, 7th Duke of Ravensmoor, who had come home to bury the last of his name and had found instead the whole of his heart waiting in a village lane, would count himself, against all the deserving, the most fortunate man in England, and would be right.